Hello and welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast with Virtual Coffee with Ashish. Today I have a special guest, Toni Della Fuente. I said that right. Took me 2 times, but I said that right. But before I get into it, I just wanted to say welcome. It's a weekly podcast. We go live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as Clubhouse. So you can actually call into the show as well if you want using Clubhouse. And for people who are coming in for the first time, we talk about cloud security with different cloud security practitioners every week, ranging from CISOs as well as senior leaders in the space. But before we get into the episode, I have a quick word from my sponsor. And the sponsor is
Ashish and Cloud Security Podcast listeners. Thanks for giving Exonius the opportunity to sponsor the show. Exonius does exactly 3 things. By connecting to existing data sources, Exonius gives customers a comprehensive asset inventory, both cloud and on-prem. It then uncovers security gaps, and finally, it automatically validates and enforces policies. Thanks again, and check us out at exonius.com.
Thank you, Exonius, for sponsoring the episode. Now, without further ado, I have a song, by the way, which I love this, and it'll make sense when you guys hear the song for why the song is more appropriate for this. Oh, there you go. Hey, Toni, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I know I screwed up your name from the first time, so I'm not going to screw up the second time. So for people who haven't really heard of you before, Toni, I'm just going to say Toni. The more I say, the more I try and repeat the last name. I'm like, oh, am I going to screw this up? But Fuente,
right.
Yes. But as it's a tradition over here, so I've got my cup here, man, over here. Cheers, man. Thank you so much for coming.
Cheers.
Oh, by the way, you need to tell people the story for why you have a Black Hat 2008 Europe bottle in your hand. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, I presented Prowler there back in 2018. Yeah, and I got the bottle.
Yeah, so Toni has for people who are joining from the Clubhouse space there, Toni is holding onto a black bottle from Black Hat Europe 2018, where he presented the Prowler for the first time, and he got like a lot of souvenirs. We were just talking about this offline, that this may be like a priceless item moving forward, considering we don't know how or when we would go into a live stream ever. So I'm going to start with the obvious. What got you into this space, like of cybersecurity and cloud security? Like, what was your journey into this?
Well, it was a long journey. I started in computers when I was 19 after high school. I started building computers from scratch, administering Windows NT networks and proxies and things like that. And after that, I moved from Granada, my hometown at the south of Spain. I moved to Madrid. Then from Madrid to the US, Atlanta for a few years, and I started working in cloud security pretty much since I started working for a partner of AWS. And since 2014, more or less, I'm doing different things around AWS. Yep.
Right, and I guess, is that kind of the time when you started making Prowler as well? Or I think where that came in before you kind of joined AWS, and Jeff Barr tweeted about you, for people who don't know about this.
Well, actually, I took over a new position in Alfresco, the company I worked before joining AWS. And that position was about just taking care of the cloud security. And I said, well, we had like 30 something accounts, AWS accounts, and I had to look after those accounts. And I said, what can I do? Where should I start looking at, right? And I said, and by that time, the CIS released the AWS CIS Security Benchmark PDF.
Yep.
And I said, okay, let's do a tool that implements that CIS. Everybody loves CIS. I have done CIS related hardening before for Linux, because I come from the sysadmin side of things, and with Linux. And I said, okay, let's do a tool that does the same thing for the AWS. And I started a very small shell script. And after that, I added more and more stuff. I split it in multiple scripts actually, because it's a huge script, and I added more checks or controls than the CIS itself, and it is what it is now, Prowler.
Yeah,
So
wow.
that was back in 2016, I think, and after 4 years after.
Right. So you were almost developing for 2 years before you even presented that at Black Hat then.
Yeah, I made it open source from the beginning, pretty much, even before it was called Prowler, because the first name was CIS, AWS, whatever script.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. And I think it's a very interesting one, right? Because I'm going to take a step back here, because we're talking about incident response as well. And a lot of people kind of find themselves lost in that definition, especially in the cloud context. So I'm going to start with the very simple version then. So from a cloud security assessment perspective, we had an episode earlier this season, which is great. I definitely recommend people checking it out on the website. But what is cloud security assessment for you? What does that really mean? And I guess for you, especially when you think about cloud security assessment from a cloud context rather than running in a security assessment on-prem.
Well, when it comes to a cloud security assessment, you have to cover the 360 degrees of the security posture of our organization in the cloud. It's not only about one or two topics, or it's not even only about technical assessment, to say, okay, how do you have this configured? It's not only about that. This is good because it gives you context about what you have in the cloud, but it's more about what is your posture when it comes to incident, to identity access management, or to detective controls, or infrastructure security, data protection. What type of controls you have in place, or incident response? What do you do when you have an issue? And also, what type of services are you using, or resources, and how do you have those resources configured? Because when in case of the shared responsibility model, everything that the user or the customer has to configure in terms of security is your responsibility. So how do you do that? Do you have policies? Do you have prevention in that?
That's very interesting. And if I add the layer of the whole incident response in there as well, so what is incident response from that perspective in cloud for you then?
Well, if you are really prepared to respond to an incident, in terms of do you have the proper education to know what to do in case of an incident response? Do you have are you prepared to do the different activities or to follow a runbook, when something is going on, like if you have a credentials exfiltration or for whatever reason a bucket is open to public or things like that.
Yeah, so sorry, now go on.
No, well, it's just to be ready for to respond to an incident. And in the cloud, is different because it is the infrastructure. When the infrastructure is deployed as a software, is automated. You are creating your services around or your workloads around multiple AWS services, for example. You have to respond any incident in the same way, and using the same weapons, let's say that way, that you use to build your infrastructure. Otherwise, you are lost. You are losing time also.
So how different is that to doing incident response on-premise versus, say, doing in cloud or AWS specifically, I guess?
Well, you have the response has to be as much as possible automate. So to detect automatically and respond automatically to the events. So we have services like, for example, GuardDuty, that is going to tell you, hey, your EC2 instance is mining Bitcoins, or doing something that looks like it's mining Bitcoins, right? So go automate the isolation and the prepare and also the investigation. The investigation in case of digital forensics itself can be also very different to what it is forensics investigation in the traditional computers, right? Or physical computers, information, because you don't have access to anything. You don't have to, when it comes to identification, for example. So or when it comes to preservation, you don't preserve a hard drive. When you are doing forensics, you don't have to put a hard drive in a zip bag.
Or especially in a cloud context where you have EC2 instance, which is just a server, EBS volume. Wait, so that's an interesting one. So forensic as well. Are there enough forensic tools out there to help people do forensics in cloud, or people are just making it up?
Well, in the open source world are a few, probably not enough. Never is enough in terms of security,
of course,
right?
yes.
But there is a large room to improve in terms of open source security tools in general, and for forensics as well. So we have AWS IR or Margarita Shotgun for memory acquisition, but and many companies have their own built-in house tools,
right?
Because in a lot of cases it depends on the best practices that you are following. But if you have, let's talk only about EC2 instances, right? The virtual machines. For those that are not familiar with AWS, the virtual machines, or where you spin up a server, right? Virtual server.
Yeah.
So if you have an security incident, what do you do in traditional forensics, let's say? So you have to to physically isolate, or you can even shut it down and do an analysis afterwards. But in the cloud, you can automate certain things, or actually you have to automate certain activities like isolate the network isolation, even the memory acquisition. Or if you have a golden AMI, which is let's say the mother of the operating system and the application that you are running, and has the baseline of all the packages, the files, etc. You can do a diff. You can automate that difference analysis between the instance that has been hacked and your golden AMI. And this, if you do that automatically, or sort of automatically with a process, that makes your life easier. But not everybody has that ready. So we will share some links for the people to see how to make that happen. But for sure, it's different. It's different. And we are saying only in terms of analysis, but for acquisition, or preservation there are some important differences.
Yeah, because I feel like the other difference also is that depending on how mature you are in cloud, that instance that you're working with, or the server that you're working with, that may die before you even get to it. Like you got an instant response, you may use something like a Prowler or something, it responds, but before you even get to it, the server doesn't even exist anymore. Right? You know what I mean? Like with the whole ephemeral concept that cloud is given. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is why I said before that you have to fight an incident the same way that you build your infrastructure. So if you have a auto-scaling group, and one of those instances, or all of them, have been compromised, and in 10 minutes or less, those instances are no longer available, what do you do, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, is there something that you can do though? Like I don't know if what. Sorry, go on.
You can trigger stuff. You can trigger different actions using guard duty, for example, and to do the different actions in the EBS volumes, or even in the running instance itself.
Yeah. Also, you can almost. Oh, right. Okay. So because to your point, if there's an incident and you lose the server, but at least there has been some breadcrumbs left behind, whether in guard duty or CloudTrail or something or the other, there's something left behind at least for you to kind of trace back what would have happened. So at least you can stop it from happening again.
Exactly. If it's doing something around the API, the AWS API, you will see for sure something in CloudTrail. If it's using DNS or network, the DNS is trying to resolve a name using a well-known or in a thread database. You can detect that in guard duty, or even some IP addresses based on the different attacks that are existing in thread databases.
Right. So maybe this is a good time for me to introduce Prowler as well then. So for people who don't know Prowler and probably have never heard of Toni, what's Prowler and why should they even think about using Prowler in AWS, I guess?
Well, let me describe Prowler a little bit like if I have to tell my mom what Prowler is.
Oh, perfect.
So,
Perfect.
okay, we all have a car, or pretty much everybody has a car, right? So when you take your car to the garage, they put, pretty much any modern car, you can connect it to a laptop and see
Yep.
what's going on in the car. If it
Right.
has all the fluids, the liquids, the brakes, everything is working properly. It has like 10, 20, 40 checkpoints in your car.
Right.
So
Yep.
what Prowler does is exactly the same for your AWS cloud, for your account or your multiple accounts in AWS. And it has today 182 checkpoints, but
Wow.
growing because there is a vibrant community creating
Yep.
new checks. I do checks, I write checks also pretty much every week, just because I want to do checks, because I need them, or because somebody asked me to write any new checkpoint. But yeah, if you don't know what to do in your AWS cloud in terms of security, if you run Prowler and you get red if you have to fix something, and green if you are good to go, basically.
Oh, so actually that's an interesting one. It's kind of like a checkpoint for maybe if you don't know what to start off with. You know how a lot of people say start with CIS benchmark, but it's not really automated. You kind of have to figure out. And I feel CIS benchmark is not really effective for like a multi-account. Like if you have a large AWS landscape, the CIS kind of falls apart really quickly because even with I'll probably give one straight example, which is that root account with MFA. But for people who use multi-account, the child account doesn't really have a root account that you access unless you reset the password and go through that whole ordeal. So does Prowler kind of work in that multi-account space as well?
You can run Prowler in just one account or multiple accounts. Something that is in the roadmap is to tell you best practices around AWS organizations. Okay,
Yeah.
but in terms of multi-account best practices, it goes beyond CIS. But let me tell you something. CIS, if everybody goes through CIS, it's good. It's good. Hopefully, everybody is complying with CIS.
Yeah.
Not only in AWS, but in everything, in Linux or Windows or anything else. But Prowler covers way more than CIS, and tells you from specific services to general configuration. I mean, everything are services from IAM to EC2 security groups, etc. And also it goes through everything, for example, in AWS Glue or SageMaker or even RDS, etc.
Yep. Oh, actually, that's a great point for me to bring the question from Nanika. I think she's been like following us for some time as well. Hey, Nanika. So her question is, how is Prowler different from the CIS benchmark?
Actually, it's not different. A Prowler includes CIS benchmark and has CIS benchmark, if I remember correctly, are like around 50 checks, and Prowler includes the CIS plus 120 or something, or 130 more.
Yep.
So it goes through your entire infrastructure and tells you what you have to fix.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think which you've already covered already. I think the difference between a CIS benchmark, probably another one is the fact that it's just a list, right? It's not implemented in your AWS account, whereas Prowler is that almost like a framework that you can put around your AWS account and use that to automatically detect. I think kind of where we start this conversation, where how do I detect something automatically? And something like your point about checklist when you take your car to the garage. Like I think that's where like the true value of Prowler is, because it's nothing from your cloud provider like an AWS at this point in time for this. Would you
exactly
right?
So yeah, the CIS is at the end of the day is a document that tells you, hey, this is the best practice that a few people said that are the best practices.
That's right. They never spoke to us, but they think it's a good practice.
Yeah, and what I did with Prowler is to automate that checkpoint. That those best practices that tells you without you to having to go and click or go to run any command or anything. It tells you what you have properly configured or not. But yeah, the long story short, Prowler includes CIS plus many other checkpoints.
Yep, and I think this is probably a good point for me to point out as well. We've got people from Clubhouse as well, so I'll definitely encourage them to tap the hand icon if they have any questions for Toni to come up, and I'll be happy to kind of bring them over. All right, so moving forward with this, so now we've spoken about what Prowler is, but out of curiosity, what's the origin story? Like, why do this in the first place, I guess?
Yeah. As I said, back in 2016, I took over the security in my previous company.
Yeah.
Cloud security, and it was just me. And we were two in security, but for cloud security, just me by that time. And we had almost 100 engineers working in 36 AWS accounts. And
right.
I said, okay, what can I do here? I said, I have to automate this. I cannot be account by account, region by region, service by service, looking at the best practices. If everybody has everything good, not public buckets, not public, EC2 instances or whatever other service. And I wrote a very simple script to tell them and to ask them, hey, run this script, and if you see anything red, fix it. I'm not going to fix it for you. You have to fix it. And after that, I make it all open source, and it became very popular apparently, and a lot of people is using it. It's very, very easy to use. You don't have to do much more than having only the AWS CLI. By that time also we have. There was Scout Suite and nothing else, I think, by that time.
Yeah,
so now we have a bunch of other tools, which is great. So if you are in cloud security, run all of them, and you will realize what you have to fix. But by that time, it was Prowler and Scout Suite probably.
Yeah, I love that about you because because I think it's all about the community with you as well. You're not there just to because the Prowler itself has about 3.9K I believe stars on GitHub, and more than 500 more than 500 folks as well. So people are definitely finding Prowler to be quite valuable for their day-to-day activity in terms of making sure that they have some visibility of the security posture. So yeah, man, I'm glad you did what you did as well. So I'm sure the community is quite grateful based on how much it is shared and how much people talk about it. I think, not sure if people know about this, but Jeff Barr, the guy from AWS who talks about every product release, tweeted about it as well, that hey, you should check out Prowler. So yeah, it's definitely known in the AWS space as well. But because we're talking about incident response as well, I'm keen to know from your side that we spoke about forensic and how forensic analysis is different in cloud. We spoke about incident response and how that's different, because isolation is quite different at that point as well. How do you go about, I guess, for people who are building an incident response plan, right? Now they're listening to this and going, oh, what happens if my EC2 instance just disappears, or my server disappears and my services disappear? We spoke about little breadcrumbs as well. For people who are starting today with an incident response plan, what do you kind of recommend? How do they go? What are the first basic steps that you would do to sort of set them up for success so that they can do it at scale when they have, to your point, 50, 60 AWS accounts as well?
Well, first of all, learn and understand your infrastructure. So you mentioned also before Prowler, and something that we do also internally is to run Prowler when an incident is happening, because you can see what you have, what type of services are you using in the AWS cloud, and eventually you can realize what could be the attack vector, right? So first of all is to understand and know what you have in your hands, right?
Yep.
In general. Then, of course, be ready. Be ready. If you don't attack yourself, somebody else is going to do it, right? So be ready. How do you have to be ready? So let's pick the 5 more important or common security incidents and play and play with those runbooks, prepare those runbooks, prepare the automation around that. In AWS, we have documentation for pretty much everything. So sometimes it's harder to not to find the documentation, but to find the right documentation, right? And there is automation and documentation to know what to do when it comes to, for example, credentials. If somebody exposed the credentials in GitHub, for example, what you should do. So you, as a company, you need to know what to do in that case. Not only in technical space, which is fine, you need to contain the incident, right? But also, what else? What else in legal or something else? If you expose PII in a S3 bucket, what should you do? Or if you get an email from AWS Abuse, that you have an EC2 instance that is doing an SSH brute force to a bunch of IP addresses, for example. What should you do? So be ready for the containment and things like that.
That's pretty awesome. And I've got Crystal here as well. She's got a question. So she's been like, how do I put it? I've had so many conversations with Crystal about zero trust, and very, very interesting person. So hey, Crystal, welcome to the show. Did you have a question for Toni?
Conversation, and I'm just so interested in how this would be done with a segregated, when you have multiple segregated networks within AWS. I come from a company where we separate multiple. We have about 3 or multiple environments and run under AWS under separate accounts, if you were. So just how would that look like, and is there a way to streamline that so that they can all kind of work together?
Awesome, great question, Crystal. What do you think, Toni?
Well, so when it comes to the cloud, we have like two ways to see the infrastructure. One is the infrastructure itself, as you see the AWS API, right, and the networking itself. So they are kind of connected, but you can take advantage of the infrastructure, the AWS infrastructure, to fix any networking issue. For example, so if you have multiple accounts or whatever network between multiple accounts, let's say account workload A in one account, workload B in another account, they are talking each other. So you can play with the play between quotes, right? Between those accounts with the AWS API and the services. So if you have, for example, guard duty, the guard duty is going to look after the traffic that is around the VPCs. In and out of the VPC is going to tell you there is something that looks like a threat, and you can detect that. No matter what is the number of accounts, if it's inside a VPC. I don't know if that is clear, but
right. Also, to your point, so the segmentation side is more that, I mean, that's probably harder to predict, but at least having tools like Guard Duty, maybe Security Hub, which kind of brings all of it together. Is that how you would approach it? Is that what you meant?
Well, in terms of threats in the network, Guard Duty is the tool. In terms of security best practices, Security Hub is the service that well, I said tool, but these are actually both services, AWS services.
Sweet. Sorry, Chris, just making sure. Did we answer your question directly? Or I think
yes, that was very helpful.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
So I've got a few more questions coming in as well. I've got I hope I pronounced his name correctly. Sorry, man. Catalin. I'm going to say that, Catalin. So appreciate if I'm incorrect. Please let me know. So his comment is, you can detect automatically using AWS Security Hub. You can use config to automate the remediation for AWS. I used Prowler at the time when there is no CIS benchmark in AWS, but now they have it. Wow, there you go, man. You have someone who used it before the CIS existed. So
nice.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I've got another comment. Yeah, and I've got another comment from Nanika. Seeing Prowler AWS security tool, does GDPR and HIPAA checks any plans for NIST SP800-553 controls, checking to see FSMA FedRAM check. Would you work? Is there any work going on for that?
Let me go through the first question. Well, it was a comment, not a question, right? Or well, for Kathleen, let me say something that the Prowler is integrated natively to Security Hub, so you can send findings from Prowler to Security Hub. Of course, you have CIS in Security Hub. You don't have to send the CIS findings from Prowler. You can just run the extras and any other check that you want to do.
Yeah.
And for the other question,
I think it's probably maybe it is not a question. I think it's just maybe more actually out of curiosity, because it's an open source solution. So sorry about that. Is there any open source? Because it's an open source tool, anyone can add more checks into it as well, right? So it's not just a matter of I guess like someone need to wait for NIST or FSMA or FedRAM. Is that right?
Exactly. So actually, most of the groups that we have in Prowler have been done by the community. So PCI, HIPAA, etc. I mean, I'm not a compliance expert. I know about Prowler. I know a little bit about AWS security. I know about security best practices, but I don't really know about. I mean, a little bit about NIST. But to do that mapping, like the PCI mapping that we have in Prowler or many others, you need to really understand the framework side and a little bit of Prowler. So you can list the Prowler checks and say, okay, this is for this for that, this for that. So with that said, to do the NIST SP853 or FSMA or FedRAM is a matter of time. I mean, I'm not expert of FedRAM, for example, but I can help anyone to explain how to do that mapping. Because to create a group in Prowler, if you want to run Prowler FedRAM, is very easy. You have it's a comma separated number of checks. It's so easy. I think it's one of the secrets of Prowler.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say it's worthwhile calling out the fact that just because there's a particular kind of, I guess, checklist, because, I mean, what Nanika mentioned is FedRAM, FSMA, NIST, but you could have other ones as well, which are relevant for your industry, but you need to apply them in AWS. You can totally use, I guess you can totally make that checklist yourself and contribute back into the Prowler GitHub, which is an open source, so others can benefit from it as well. So hopefully, I guess that was a question or a comment, but I think I got my answer as well. So thanks for that, man. I've got one more here from Jefferson. Do you recommend any SOAR platform? Ooh, SOAR is an interesting one. So I'm curious to know your response, man. Do you recommend any SOAR platform to automate response? We had a whole conversation for half an hour about SOAR on Clubhouse the other day. So I'm curious to know your opinion about SOAR.
Jefferson, I don't know if I want to respond to this question. I don't want to endorse anybody.
Well, let's just say if it's still evolving, I guess, because I think the conclusion was the fact that SOAR is probably not a blanket, I guess, thing that you can apply everywhere, because it depends on. Because I'll share what the conclusion of the last conversation was, and maybe you can share your thoughts on this as well. Like the SOAR platform is great for non-essential, non-production resources to begin with, because you don't want to do auto remediation in production, because you don't want to switch off services just because I think there's a red flag here, because there could be false positive. That's kind of what the conclusion we landed at, but not sure where you stand on this, Toni, at this point in time.
Well, in my experience with Prowler, I have been asked many times about auto remediation. I can talk about that later. But in terms of security orchestration, automation, and response, I have seen using Security Hub integration. Probably it's not exactly a SOAR, but it's very helpful for sure. Splunk integration. What Prowler sending findings to Splunk that was probably the first things type of integrations I saw in Prowler long time ago with Wazoo, with Elasticsearch and Kibana. I mean, to be honest, I don't have experience enough to recommend any platform other than Security Hub because I have been working with that for long. Of course, internally in AWS as well. But in terms of auto remediation, this is something that a lot of people have been asked about in Prowler. And when you have to remediate something, you need to have a different set of permissions. And that is dangerous as well. So I prefer others to do the same. I mean, you have to create. You can create config rules to do that. You can create SSM documents to do that as well in AWS. And who knows? Eventually, Prowler can do some remediations, but for sure, Prowler is going to tell you what to do to remediate the findings, and this is going to be probably very soon.
That's very awesome. So, well, this is a world exclusive there for you for Prowler. Hopefully, we answer your question, Jefferson. And but if you have any recommendation yourself for both Toni and myself, we'll be open to that as well, man. Thanks, Jefferson, for that question. I've got a fan comment for you, man. Alex Ray. We're using Prowler at scale. It's been a huge help in both teaching developer teams in their development phases and also auditing regularly in the centralized fashion. Huge kudos to you.
Thank you, Alex.
That's pretty. That's pretty awesome, man. I think there you go. So people are already using Prowler at scale and trying to see or seek benefits from it as well. Thanks for that comment, Alex. By the way, I'm sure you get messages like this quite often, considering the 4,000 plus people who actually consume that and the ones who haven't really started over there. But I'm pretty sure you get some of these quite often. I want to spin this around a bit more because we spoke about incident response and doing the scale. We touched on forensics earlier as well. Like in the whole incident response plan that we kind of spoke about, how would you, what kind of role would you say forensic would have? Like how do you plan for forensic in the beginning when you're setting up? Like I took your advice, I went guard duty, I took AWS Security Hub as well. I've got this set up. How do I go about designing my, I guess, how would I respond to forensic if evidence collection if I need to? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to share some documentation about that in the for the show. But when it comes to acquisition, for example, there are a few distributions, Linux distributions like Cain or Sift that can help. So a good practice is to have either a dedicated AWS account for forensics
or like a separate account.
VPC. Yeah, a separate account for forensics or a CloudFormation template that can build that environment in a given account in a point in time.
Right. Okay. Cool. Perfect.
So you can spin up a new instance inside a specific VPC or isolated VPC where you can start your investigation. That is going to save you a lot of time. So not to be playing something new when you don't know what to do, but having that ready in an isolated, dedicated account or in the particular account using CloudFormation, for example, you can spin up everything automatically. And having that ready, put all the automation around, for example, to analyze the snapshot, the EBS volume snapshot, running the tools to see. It depends because I don't want to mention any specific tool that can be for Linux. I mean, you have Windows can be different, but to look if you find any evidence in the file system, or you can find any well-known or indicator of compromise in memory, things like that. So long story short, to have the automation around the preparation. Then you can do the analysis, the forensics, hopefully automatic as well. It depends of your maturity, but if not, at least the baseline is ready.
Interesting. Okay. So to your point, CloudFormation template, because I always find that there's one element, and kind of we touched on this earlier as well, the whole connectivity to the EC2 instance or connectivity to that resource. I love the CloudFormation template idea because then you're able to spin it up inside that account where the compromise may have happened as well. So that's pretty awesome suggestion. So I'll definitely encourage people to check that out as well. Sorry, go on.
Let me add something because we are talking about the kind of a traditional incident with virtual machines, right, with a server. But unfortunately, nowadays we have more than that. We have serverless. We have also Kubernetes, containers. So what is the best practice? The best practice here is to have a trace from, like we can say bumper to bumper, control, right? So from the cloud front to the database and everything in between, and how to do the correlation across all the logs, to have a proper policy of log retention and log collection, is key in this case. So we can help in AWS to do that, but that is the customer responsibility to have those logs in a place where they can do some analysis.
Interesting. And so would that all go into Security Hub or like a SIEM?
Well, when it comes to all the services logs, so security in Security Hub, you don't have logs. In Security Hub, you have best practices, right? Checks that you can get from config groups, for example. In Guard Duty, you have threats, detection of threats, right? I'm talking more about if you have whatever service that you have, make sure in production at least, make sure it's logging properly. Then you can correlate it across, the entire stack.
Right. Okay. Cool. That makes sense to me. I'm sure people would have questions for it as well. So I'll let them answer the question. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it can be CloudWatch or can be third party.
That's right. Because there could be so many like, it depends on what you have. So I don't want to give people a consultant answer, but or I think what you said is very apt as well. I'll definitely encourage people who may have any follow-up question to tap the hand icon on Clubhouse or probably leave a question there. But that's great advice, my friend. The switching gears, because we've been talking about Prowler and calling it, and I know you work for AWS as well, but this is a non-AWS tool. This is an open source community tool for people who are, I guess, more for. Is there a cloud version to this? I guess where do you stand in the whole? I personally think the right tool for the right job, but what are your thoughts on people who are thinking, shouldn't we just wait for the cloud native version to come in? I guess. What are your thoughts on that? Cloud native versus like going for an open source. What challenges can they see if they were to go down the other path of open source?
Yeah, well, first of all, I feel really supported inside AWS and Amazon in general with open source. So I can do pretty much what I want in Prowler because it's good for AWS customers. Yeah. And of course, we see every day, every week, new checks in Security Hub, right? So the point of Security Hub, you have to enable Security Hub per region. You have to enable whatever you want to check in Security Hub. And it's totally fine because you can plan your checkpoints with Security Hub. And this is fine. The point of using Prowler is that you can run it very easily in your site using your own credentials, right? To analyze out of the box all the regions in just one shot, let's say that way. Right? So you don't have to configure anything. It's going to go and see the same thing that you can see as a user and tells you what you have to fix or not. With that said, Prowler is growing more in specific checks and features like also visualization and allow customers to do whatever they need in a probably more flexible manner than a service because it's a tool. It's a tool that you download, you do with whatever you want with it. It's not really comparable between Security Hub and Prowler because you have more flexibility with a tool that you can do whatever.
Yeah. So what tools do you recommend? I know Prowler is your favorite, but what other tools do you recommend in the open source spape? I know, a bit of a biased answer there, but what do you recommend outside of Prowler?
Yeah. First of all, answering your question, your question is, and I work with customers every day, and they and I always recommend using the most native tools or services as possible, because it's going to give you more. Everything is going to be easier at the end of the day. You know the APIs, etc. Right?
Yep.
If you want an extra, the extra mile, look at you need probably to use another tool for or service for partners or open source tools. In terms of open source tools, I can recommend pretty much all of them. I mean, if you are using any open source tool, it's because you are worried about security. If you are worried about security, you are doing a good job.
Yep.
That's simple. That's simple. So run all of them with care, of course. Don't break anything, but at least for assessment, like Cloud Mapper, like Scout Suite, for like Prowler, like many others that I have in my arsenal of AWS security tools that we are going to share also the link. Run all of them for IAM to understand what is your IAM posture. If you have two open roles, or you have roles that allow escalation of privileges, things like that. Run all of them and understand your infrastructure. So I cannot pick one. I would pick all of them, right?
Yep. I think maybe another way to put this also would be that pick a one that you understand, because some of them have been written in different languages as well. And you may or may not be comfortable in Python, but you may love, some other language. So you may choose a different path. So I'm sure, to your point, if you go on GitHub, you'll definitely find something which is probably written in a language that you understand. But most of them are pretty straightforward, and Python is usually easy enough as well. That's my biased answer because I know Python.
Yeah, well, I'm learning Python, but I did Prowler with Bash because for me it's very easy to write Bash scripts. I'm using the CLIs. The AWS CLI is very powerful. So if you have a tool in top of the CLI, you forget a lot of headaches, in terms of connections and a lot of things like that. And everybody knows Bash. I mean, it's easy. It's easy enough to write a check. So you can write a Prowler check in 5 lines. With just two AWS CLI commands. And of course, you can do that also in Python. You can write checks. In Prowler, you cannot write checks in Python today, but you will be able to do that
hopefully soon. Yep.
And but use the tool that you are more comfortable with, for sure.
No, awesome, man. Thank you. Where do you see, and this is kind of like looking into the crystal ball kind of question, where do you see the whole incident response space grow in cloud? I know we kind of stopped when you started making Prowler. There was no CIS benchmark. Now we have CIS benchmark and the CSA Cloud Security Alliance. That's what I'm like. What is that? What are they called? So the space is growing, and I'm curious to know from your side, who's probably been in the space for probably the longest, where do you see the incident response space go in cloud? More automation, more tools, or where do you see this grow?
Yeah, it's more and more understanding of what to do. So we have more and more services and more interaction between services and how to automate all that stuff. So we talk a lot about how to respond to an incident in an EC2 instance. But what about a notebook in other services or a container in EKS? So all that automation, the automation across all other services that have something related with compute are also important. So the automation beyond EC2 instances is probably what is next, to understanding that we can have incidents beyond that, beyond an EC2. Yeah,
it's really interesting, and
there's a lot of education in that space.
Yeah, and because I think what you said is right, because primarily every time you kind of try and look for incident response conversations, they're usually floating around EC2 instances. They're not really floating around, hey, what if you have like a Kubernetes, like a Q pod in your AWS and suddenly it gets compromised? What do you do for that? Are there tools for this? How do you extract something out of a container? Like we haven't really gone into that any of that detail as well. So do appreciate that, man, as well. I've got a question from Kathleen again. Welcome, my friend. What is the benefit of using the integration of Prowler with AWS Security Hub, if any, since we have the possibility of having a central dashboard of the status checks using Prowler?
Yeah, well, so if you have other tools in Security Hub for compliance or for to send findings, whatever type of findings that you can send to Security Hub using AWS security funding format, you can use Prowler or a set of specific checks in Prowler to Security Hub, which is something that I have seen in many customers. So, of course, it does make sense to run the CIS checks in Prowler if you have them in Security Hub, for example, unless you want, because it's the same. But if you have, for example, specific checks that you want to write or are available in Prowler, for example, for Glue or for RDS, or even detect secrets, or Internet Expose, which is another group that is available in Prowler that is going to tell you what is exposed to the internet in any account, in any account or any region in your infrastructure, and even check if you have something exposed in Shodan, for example, in Shodan.io, this website where you can find IP addresses and resources exposed or open to the internet. So these kind of specific checks or even secrets, do you have any key or password or certificate, etc., in your infrastructure? You can look at that in Prowler. So we have, I have seen customers, very large customers, they have their own specific checks. Something that is public is the government of Canada, for example. They have their specific checks. They wanted to write in Prowler. So this is something that you can take advantage of Prowler with Security Hub. But of course, you can write your own config rules as well.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. I did pronounce his name correctly. Yes. At least one name I didn't screw up. So thanks, man. I really appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears here. And I'm definitely going to give a quick shout out to folks in the clubhouse as well who've been patiently listening in to this conversation, especially Crystal as well. Thanks, Crystal. The conversation is, I'm going to change gears now. So it's towards the end of the show now. So I'll probably go into some of the fun questions because I know we've been talking about technology for some time. Prowler, automation, and all this. So 3 questions, simple ones, not too complex. What do you spend most time on when you're not working on Prowler, cloud, or technology?
I do triathlon.
You do triathlons?
I used to be swimming or running or cycling. And I spend time with my girlfriend, of course. Family, friends, but most of the time training.
Wow, I mean, Ironman, is that what you go for, or just triathlon?
I've done a few Ironmans, half Ironmans, and other triathlons. But yeah.
Jesus, wow, man. That's in one of my bucket list items for from before I die, kind of thing. So I'll definitely take some lessons from you on that one. So the next question: what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
Probably to have my friends and my I have 2 brothers. I'm very close to them. I love them a lot. And to have a family close to you, or even if it's not close physically, close,
emotionally, this connection.
is good. Yeah, I think I'm very proud of that.
That's a great answer, man. And I think although I'm not going to talk about COVID and stuff, but they're definitely the distance has never been a reason for people to not feel close, I guess. What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share before the time when we could eat something, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I love Indian cuisine. I love that. I love spicy food.
Oh, nice.
And hot sauces.
Hot sauces. Really, wait, really hot favorite hot sauce? What's your favorite hot sauce?
Any hot sauce, but not very, very hot. But I have tasted all of them. I remember once I went to New Orleans, and I tried even the World Guinness record of the hot sauces. That
All
was
right. If
terrible.
you've tried, wait, you went to New Orleans and you had the world's most chilliest, I guess, was
Yeah,
that right? The word
yeah, something like that.
spiciest chili.
Yeah,
Oh man, you're pretty
that
brave, man.
wasn't. No, that wasn't a good experience, but yeah, something that I remember.
That's awesome. Cool. Now that's pretty much what the question that I have for this episode, man. But I do appreciate taking the time out. So for people who may have follow-up questions and want to connect with you and probably find you, where can they connect with you and maybe have a follow-up conversation?
Well, probably Twitter or LinkedIn. So they can find me in Twitter as Tony Blix, ToniBlyx.
Yep.
My DMs are open, so I'm always happy to know about people using the Prowler and doing whatever else in cloud security that I'm interested, or even Linux security. I I love also doing stuff with open source and Linux, so I'm always happy to hear from others.
Awesome. I'll leave those in the comment show notes as well, which should be on www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Just want to give a quick shout out to Crystal, Alexander P, and Sukrain on Clubhouse as well. Do appreciate you guys joining us, and thank you, Crystal, for your question as well. I'm going to close the room on Clubhouse, and I'm going to close this meeting as well. But I will see all of you on the next episode. Definitely check Toni out with all the episode information that we shared them. Thanks, everyone. And I will see you all next week. Thanks, Toni. We'll see you next week, man.
Thank you.
I'm going to see you in person, but let's just do this way. But thanks so much for this, Toni. I really appreciate it.